Hey all, it's Tom. I know it's been a while, but I had some advice from some people that since I love comics so much, I should actually do some blogs about them. So I want to start with actually one of my very favorite groups, the New Mutants. You can read that through my wrinkly shirt here. Okay, so going back, they started back. Officially, they started back in 1982 with Marvel graphic novel number 4. However, if you really want to go farther back, like to the very, very first appearance of the very first New Mutant, we're going to have to look back at Giant Size X-Men number 1. And that one was Ileana Rasputin, also known as Magic or Magique or however you want to pronounce it. She's the little sister of Colossus. So if you know who Colossus is, longtime X-Man, turns into organic steel, but he saved her from a runaway tractor when she was just a little girl. So technically, she's the very first New Mutant that they showed, ever. Following that, we had Marvel Team Up number 100. It was Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. Now, the person who officially showed the very first official New Mutant, Karma. Now, Karma is a Vietnamese refugee, and she is technically she's a high-class telepath, but it's a very specific telepathic talent. It was elaborated later on, but actually the actual power of hers is what we call possession. So what she'll do is she will take control of your mind. You are basically left a blank slate. You don't remember anything. You don't know anything that's going on. She is in control of your mind. She controls your body. She speaks with your words. But in a way, you also kind of influence her because eventually she kind of absorbs part of you, at least your personality-wise. So the longer she has control of you, the more like you she becomes. So she doesn't really like to, use it too often, but she will. So she had to go against her twin brother Tran, who had the same power, and he was playing all these strings, these games behind the scenes and pitting Spider-Man versus the Fantastic Four and trying to manipulate Karma into coming to work for him and their uncle, General Koi, which he was a criminal. And of course, Tran loved to use his powers to be evil and manipulate people, and one such person was Viper. Now, he got Viper and her friend to fight, and of course Viper ended up killing her friend. She was possessed by him, and then she came out, and then he was laughing and she's angry, and that comes back to bite people in the butt later. But anyway, so that was Karma's first thing after she realized what had gone wrong, and she actually ended up having to fight Tran to the death. She absorbed his entire being into her body. So essentially, Karma and Tran, or Jean Koiman, or Shan is what a lot of people call her, and Tran Koiman, they merged to become one person. But Karma, or Jean, is the dominant personality, usually. And that we'll get into later as well. So that's the last we hear of Karma, right? Until, Marvel graphic novel number 4. That's the very first appearance of the New Mutants. Now, at this time, Professor Xavier, the founder of the X-Men, thought that the X-Men had died in space, fighting the Brood. So everyone thought the X-Men were dead because of these guys. And Deathbird, but there's a whole other story there. Anyway, so he was determined, so since they were gone, he wasn't going to have anything to do with, teaching mutants, sending any more mutants to die, because he'd already had, Colossus and Kitty Pryde and Storm and Nightcrawler and Wolverine and Thunderbird and Changeling and Phoenix and all these people who had died or thought had died before, and even Sway and Petra and Darwin and Vulcan, but that's another story as well. So people thought they'd, Colossus and Kitty Pryde and Storm and Nightcrawler and Wolverine had all died. Oh, and Cyclops. Cyclops at that time was part of the X-Men. But they didn't. They were actually out in space. So in the meanwhile, Moira McTaggart, Xavier's ex-girlfriend, was in Scotland, and she's just doing her thing. And then, who should happen upon her? Wolfsbane. She was running. This is Rain Sinclair. She was running from who she thought was her adopted father, but actuality was her biological father. He was this really super religious Scottish priest who decided to turn their entire village against Rain, saying that she was the devil and, they wanted to kill her and all that fun stuff. So she protected her. Because at first she was just a wolf. She's like, well, there's no wolves here in Scotland, not for centuries. But now, here's a wolf. And then, she got shot, and then she turned back into her human form. And Moira's like, okay, wait, hold on. This is a child. You can't do this. So she actually, somehow, she gets custody of Wolfsbane. And she brings her to Professor X. So, and in the meanwhile, while she brings her to Professor X, Reed Richards recommended, Mr. Fantastic, he recommended Karma to go to Xavier as well because he knew that Xavier taught mutants. So at this point, we have Moira, Wolfsbane, Karma, and Professor X. And she convinces him to teach these mutants because somebody needs to, and somebody needs to look out for them. And even though the X-Men were perceived to be gone, they still need mutant heroes. They still need someone to fight, and somebody needs to teach these kids how to survive. So Xavier reluctantly agrees. At that point, we thought it was reluctant. However, at that point, he was also infected by a brood, which we don't find out until shortly after. Anyway, so they get together, and in the meanwhile, Donald Pierce here, he is with the Hellfire Club. He decides to take Tessa, or later on we know her as Sage, and kidnap her. And he's trying to get his revenge on the Hellfire Club and the X-Men. And the best way for him to get revenge on the X-Men is, of course, to go after Xavier and, well, his new students. And he, of course, wants to try to, train his own in a way as cannon fodder, and then he would try to get rid of them. Because Donald Pierce is a cyborg and he hates all mutants. Flat out. So what he does while Xavier is gathering these ones, he recruits Sam Guthrie, or Cannonball, as we come to know him. Now Cannonball can, as you can see, he flies through the air with this impenetrable blasting field, so nothing can hurt him while he's flying. And yeah, so he is a human cannonball. It's really, really powerful. In the meanwhile, Xavier and Karma and Wolfsbane, they go and they meet. They find Danny Moonstar because Xavier's told of Danny by her grandfather, who is his blood brother's father. So essentially, Xavier's kind of related to her. Now, Danny Moonstar, at the time, she could only take your greatest fears or desires and turn them into illusions, so everyone can see. And it ostracized her. She also had a psychic link to animals. So that helped her because she took off into the hills of Colorado, and she ended up, hanging out with this mountain lion, and I think, what did she call him, Windrunner or something like that? Anyway, so it was just them, and then Donald Pierce sent his goons in to attack. Well, after he killed her grandfather, and she had buried him, but then his Hellfire Club goons in Mandroid armor came in after them. Mandroid armor is a weird giant suit of armor. Anyway, so they were wearing these high-tech suits that were prevent any kind of telepathic attack, which of course he wanted to have because he was going against Xavier, because Xavier was his true target all along. So then he ended up they ended up fighting, and Mirage joined up, or Danny Moonstar joined up with Karma and Wolfsbane and Xavier, and they fought them off. So at that point, they all go back to the school, and of course they get two other blips. One being Cannonball, and the other one being Roberto da Costa, Sunspot. He's in Brazil. He's a Brazilian mutant, and he can channel solar energy, and at the time he could only turn it into super strength, which helped in a bit. So they went, and while it was Moira and Karma, no, it was Moira, Karma, and Danny Moonstar went to go get Sunspot. Meanwhile, Wolfsbane and Xavier went to go get Cannonball, not knowing that Cannonball had already been recruited by Donald Pierce. So at that point, when they went to go get him, Cannonball, of course, ambushed them because he thought they were bad, because that's what Donald Pierce told him. And he took Xavier, and then Wolfsbane, of course, turned into a wolf, and she ran off because she didn't know what to do, because she was still relatively untrained at the time. And so she goes into hiding in her wolf form still. Meanwhile, after Sunspot's power manifests, his girlfriend, of course, Juliana, she's the only person to try to go and, save him out on the soccer field that he was playing when his power manifested, because everyone else ran because they were freaking out. And in the meanwhile, after that, she gets kidnapped. Sunspot gets this little message saying, come meet us or your girlfriend's dead, blah blah blah, that kind of thing. And he, of course, is going after them. And of course, Moira and Karma and Mirage, or Danny, they go to save him. In the ensuing fight, they of course fight against these cyborg Hellfire Club members, and they go to shoot Sunspot, but Juliana jumps in the way and takes the bullets for him. So she ends up dying. He wants revenge, so he joins up with them. They end up going over to Kentucky, where Wolfsbane is, and that's where they end up going to save Professor X and Tessa from Donald Pierce. And they, of course, end up meeting, officially meeting Cannonball, who at the time was a goon of Donald Pierce. And Donald Pierce ordered Cannonball to kill Sunspot. And Cannonball's like, no, we should just throw him off the property. He goes, no, I want them killed. And he's like, no. So he's like, so you decide to just, side with your own kind. And then he goes to kill Cannonball, but of course, it doesn't work. They end up saving the day after beating him. Actually, no, they free Xavier and Tessa, and then Xavier takes control of Donald Pierce's mind, and the fight's over, and they're done. Tessa deals with Donald Pierce, and Xavier has his team of New Mutants, at this point consisting of Cannonball, Wolfsbane, Karma, Sunspot, and Psyche, which later on becomes Mirage. Okay, so that's all there. They, of course, are at this point students, and he doesn't want to train them to be soldiers. He doesn't want to train them to be X-Men. He doesn't want any more X-Men. He just wants to train them so that they can survive and then do that thing. Do their own thing and, live their own lives peacefully and not have to worry about fighting for their lives. So he thinks. But of course, that brood queen that is inside him, that egg, is ready to hatch. And yeah. So in the meanwhile, actually shortly after, the students encounter their first run-in with the Sentinels. Now, the Sentinels are these giant robots that they've been pestering the X-Men since the 70s, and they're just these giant mutant hunting robots, and all they do is capture, kill, destroy, whatever. So they fight them off with the aid of a government agent, and then shortly afterwards, the training for them kind of kicks up a notch. And at this point, Karma's the leader because she's the oldest. She's the one with the most experience. So the group of them are going through their regular training, and then Mirage, of course, is being compelled to use her powers during one of the training sessions. And she ends up creating an elaborate, solid illusion of a brood who wants to try to kill her. And she thinks she's losing her mind. And at this point, the brood egg is influencing Xavier, so he's like, okay, yeah, you're kind of crazy. And so she thinks that she's losing it. Everyone else is telling her, no, you're not losing it. It's okay. We're going to get you help. And then they find out that Xavier actually is a brood. And at this point, the X-Men return from outer space. And they come in and they know that Xavier is infected with this egg. So they fight him, and Xavier at this point turns fully into a brood. So there was no saving Professor Xavier at this point. But of course it's comic books. So anyway, so the two teams team up, fight the brood, win, and the Starjammers, which is another group that we'll have to talk about later, but they're basically alien pirates. They had Xavier's DNA on file because of Xavier's time around them, and Lilandra, Xavier's beloved, being the Empress and all that, or they actually, at that time, she was a refugee with the Starjammers because of her sister Deathbird. But anyway, comic books, soap opera, long story. Anyway, so they end up cloning Xavier's body, and he goes about his business of saying that he's going to train New Mutants. And at this point, since all the New Mutants are around Kitty Pryde's age, he tells her he's going to demote her to be with the New Mutants so that she can be around children her own age, instead of with all these adults running around risking her life and all that. And of course, anyone who knows Kitty Pryde or knows of this story knows she threw a colossal fit. And of course, with Kitty Pryde came her dragon Lockheed that she met in outer space. So she doesn't want anything to do with him. In the meanwhile, in the New Mutants, again, they go to this cycling show where they have this team of bicycle stunt riders. They go in and they perform this show, and unknown to anyone else, even the riders themselves, they're basically a mutant gestalt. It's a group of mutants that, when they link their abilities, somebody becomes what they call the Black Rider. And Viper, at this point, targeted them, and she wanted to bring forth the Black Rider. So right now, this group, it was just Cannonball, Wolfswing, Karma, Mirage, and Sunspot. and they were watching that. And then, of course, who gets picked to be the Black Rider but Danny Moonstar, or Mirage. So she ends up fighting, riding around as the Black Rider. Of course, nobody knows it's her. Nobody sees where she is during this whole commotion. And she ends up being kidnapped by Viper and the Silver Samurai. So these two guys kidnap her, and they want to know where, what's her connection to the team and everything, because, of course, once they stop using their powers, she stops becoming the Black Rider. She doesn't know what they're talking about, so the New Mutants go to try to get her back. Or they want to try to get her back, but Xavier is hesitant, and he's trying to train this Team America to learn how to use their powers to focus on actually getting the Black Rider to form willingly, not just as a desperate attempt, like a reflex. So in the meanwhile, the New Mutants go to try to save her, and they end up fighting Silver Samurai and Viper in this chalet on the edge of a cliff. And then, of course, when Viper and Silver Samurai, they go, they realize that they lost because of both teams had, they gained up on them. These two teleported away because they're a couple wimpy bitches. And they end up blowing up the cliff, which, of course, sends all the New Mutants tumbling into the ocean. So, and of course, Xavier this time is telepathically linked to all of his students. So, Cannonball and everyone that is able to be saved except for Karma. Karma is disappears. They all think that she died. So she's gone. But in actuality, she was taken over by the Shadow King. So he took over her mind when she was panicking, because he saw her linked to Xavier. And that's a whole other backstory there. But basically, he's a psychic entity. He took over her mind, and he blocked Xavier from sensing her, so she can't be found. So everyone thinks she's the first New Mutant to die. So in the meanwhile, after that happens, they go on this expedition with Sunspot's mom. She's an explorer and a philanthropist, and they go to the Brazilian rainforest, and they get lost in this accident, and they end up in this place called Nova Roma, which is this lost Incan Roman society. And that society at the time was under the thrall of Selene, the Black Queen. Now, Selene is an immortal mutant, external psychic vampire, evil bitch. She basically just likes to randomly feed on the life force of the villagers, while everyone else thinks that they're basically still living in ancient Roman times. So, in this whole ordeal, they meet this young girl named Aquila, who is the great-granddaughter of Selene. And she's the daughter of, the big head honcho in Nova Roma. So they end up fighting, and they get, fighting Selene after, being poisoned and drugged and everything. And then when Danny Moonstar, Mirage, gets kidnapped with Amara, and they get taken to Selene's temple inside this volcano, where they're going to sacrifice. She's going to sacrifice them so she can actually absorb their life essence and continue to live. And she wants to when she realizes that Mirage is a mutant and she has all these powers, she wants to make her like herself. And Amara's like, no, I'm not going to have it. So she breaks free, and she lunges at her, and Selene sucks all of her life out of her, throws her into the volcano, but that awakens her powers as magma. Now, magma, as you can see, becomes this living fiery being. She can control lava, fire, make earthquakes, volcanoes, all that fun stuff. And of course, she wreaks holy hell on Selene. This makes it so she joins the New Mutants. So at this point, technically, the New Mutants consist of Cannonball, Mirage, Magma, Wolfsbane, Sunspot, and Kitty Pryde and Lockheed. Or at the time, Kitty Pryde was known as Sprite or Ariel. So shortly after, in the middle of all of that, Kitty Pryde eventually convinces Xavier that she doesn't want to be an X-baby, she wants to be an X-man because she earned it. She proves her worth to the team, goes back to the X-Men. So does Lockheed. So it goes back to being the 5, which are Cannonball, Mirage, Wolfsbane, Sunspot, and Magma. Shortly after, Colossus' little sister, Ileana, she goes to stay with him, and she ends up falling into one of her portals because she can create these teleporting stepping discs that go through this place called Limbo. And she ends up going to and falling into there, getting kidnapped by this demon lord Belasco, and she's trained in the use of the mystic arts. She ends up becoming a demon sorceress teleporter, and she forges a soul sword, hence the reason for the sword, out of a piece of her soul, which actually disrupts magic, kills demons, all that fun stuff, and she takes over Limbo. And what for her was 7 years, for us was only like a few minutes. So she aged from 7 years old to 14. And she ends up joining the New Mutants. Now, Kitty Pryde, of course, gets kidnapped with their friend Doug Ramsey, who is Cypher, or later becomes Cypher. Now, Doug is a mutant. He can translate anything. And he's a computer genius and everything. And so when Kitty Pryde... when Doug was asked to join the Hellfire Club, the Massachusetts Academy, led by the White Queen, which is a longtime enemy of X-Men, especially Kitty Pryde, because when she first joined the X-Men, Emma Frost was like the bad guy. So Emma invited Doug because she found that he was a mutant, and she wanted to have him join her team called the Hellions. Now, the Hellions are the Hellfire Club's version of the New Mutants. So at that point, we had, essentially it's these people. So we had, with a few extra, we had Firestar, we had Empath, Tarot, Roulette, Warpath, Cat's Eye, and Jetstream. Now, Firestar didn't last very long, and Warpath was originally called Thunderbird. He was the second Thunderbird because the original Thunderbird, which was his brother, was an X-Man, but he died early on like his second mission. So when Cypher was brought over to the Massachusetts Academy to check it out, without knowing actually he was a mutant or that's what Emma wanted him for, he asked Kitty Pryde to go with him because he was her, they were best friends and he had a crush on her. And so while she's over there, Kitty Pryde, of course, had this psychic link with Ileana, or Magic, and she went over there with him kind of to watch his back, and if anything happened, she could pull him out. Of course, during that whole time, this is the Secret Wars, and the X-Men get kidnapped, so she has no way of pulling them out. But in the meanwhile, Ileana, being the demon sorceress that she is, casts a spell to go locate her psychically. She sends out her psychic image, her astral form, goes to Massachusetts, finds out that Kitty Pryde is being held against her will, and that the White Queen is messing with Doug Ramsey's mind, and making him think that he's with Kitty, and dancing and kissing and all that fun stuff. So the New Mutants go, and after they find out that she's actually a demon sorceress, because they inadvertently break into her room and disturb her while she's performing her spell, and all her psychic familiars break loose and they have to capture them, and it's just a mess. So they end up going over to Massachusetts to save Kitty Pryde and Doug Ramsey. In the meanwhile, they get kidnapped themselves, captured themselves, and the White Queen, Emma Frost, is trying to make it so that the New Mutants join the Hellions. And at that point, Firestar had already left the team because she had enough of her shenanigans. So, Magic and Mirage teleport away before they can get captured like Cannonball and Wolfsbane, Magma, and Sunspot do. They go into the future accidentally because when Magic teleports, she can go through space and time. And she's still kind of learning her mastery over that, the teleportation thing. She learned to master her magic when she was in Limbo, but her teleportation power is still haphazard. So they end up going into a future where the New Mutants actually did join the Hellions, and the X-Men never returned, and Kitty Pryde joined the Hellions, and everyone was happy, and then they end up teleporting back in time, and only to like a week after they had originally left instead of a year. And then they, of course, go in and they save the New Mutants. They go to rescue them, and the Hellions are like, well, we don't want you to actually be forced to be here. We want you to be here because you want to be here. And then they end up dueling Cannonball versus Jetstream in this danger room of a sort. Danger room is the training area that the X-Men use. The Hellfire Club has their version that they copied off of the X-Men to train the Hellions. So they go in through their own little training duel, and Cannonball wins, so they go to leave. At this point, Sebastian Shaw, the Black King of the Hellfire Club, and Emma Frost, the White Queen, come in. We're like, oh, no, you're not. And, of course, Magma lets loose with her volcano or her earthquake, and all these, everyone fights, and they go to escape. And somehow, after that whole ordeal, Cypher ends up not joining the Massachusetts Academy because it wasn't for him. I'm thinking that at that time, the fact that Kitty decided not to stay had a huge deal with it. So that's the last we hear from Doug for a while, and the Hellions, and the White Queen. Then, shortly after, they have to fight the Demon Bear. Because the Demon Bear is basically